Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel. Wherever you are in the world, how are you doing? I do hope you're doing marvellously well. Love to each and every one of you. You're all very special to me. All my listeners are. And there's no accounting for good taste because let's just say stories are just the best form of entertainment there is. And you've tuned in to the right channel. But before we continue with tonight's story, which is from yesterday, so last night, if you didn't listen to the story, I strongly recommend you tune into it because the story was done in 2 parts and this is part 2. So before we continue with tonight's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with our story, shall we? The charming cabin where my father lived was a couple of hours' drive away from Fairbanks, but it was far enough to feel as if you were really out in the middle of nowhere. It was remote. Luckily, it was approachable by road, as some parts of Alaska can only be accessed by plane, which is awfully inconvenient if you ask me. I was ever grateful that my father hadn't chosen a cabin somewhere like that. It meant he could at least drive to Fairbanks for supplies. My father's simplistic rustic cabin was made from wooden beams, and it served all our immediate needs. It was comfortable, well-equipped, with a lovely cosy fireplace and wood-burning stoves with an oil-fired oven, much like our red Aga in England. It was said to be pretty old, but it was all in great condition, although he was living an off-grid lifestyle. But during the summer months, it was very pleasant, with long, warm summer days and exquisite mountain scenery. My father resumed the job where he once met my mother, taking tourists on long hiking trails through the wilderness and teaching them wilderness survival skills and what was edible in the wilds, what was poisonous, how to make fire, stuff like that. My father's quaint, rather snug cabin was simplicity in motion, with a childlike, unsophisticated innocence, as every tree used in its construction gave it a natural, wholesome living energy that made you feel as if you were sleeping under the stars, without walls separating you from the natural world. The cabin was nestled in the heart of the woods, surrounded by trees, and yet still more trees, ranging from yellow polars, quaking aspen, spruce, western hemlocks, and paper birches. The list goes on, obviously, but that is what you would expect in rural Alaska. On the right-hand side of his cabin was an enchanting alpine meadow that was breathtaking ablaze with a plethora of wild flowers, in yellows, pinks, purples, and whites. It was simply wonderful, as butterflies and bees darted from one flower to the next, and the knee-high grass nudged your knees as you brushed your way through it, navigating your way to the woods, your nostrils breathing in their fragrant floral bouquets. I could rarely comprehend why my father had gravitated towards this unconventional, unorthodox, easygoing lifestyle, released from the tangled stresses and troubled webs of modern life that can so easily incarcerate your freedom, with locks and bolts you do not see, and barred windows that are so obscure you barely actually know that they're there, that keep you cornered in a world where your cell phone dictates your life, so that sometimes you forget to take notice of the outside world that is beckoning for you to appreciate her rich offerings. I promptly reminded myself that I had my father's DNA swimming in my genes. It was hardly a surprise, therefore, that I had an affinity to this avant-garde, revolutionary, nonconformist lifestyle. For somewhere within me, there was a maverick, unconventional free spirit, burning inside of my character, bursting to come out, to make its appearance known. My brother, on the other hand, was not adventurous like I was. He thoroughly enjoyed the close confines of a cosy little English village, where the safe, reliable predictability and security of daily life offered him much self-assurance, with his fun-loving friends living doors only away from him, as my brother was much more socially interactive than I was, rather like my mother, whereas I enjoyed my own company and had always been much more of a loner, an individualistic trait that I soon realized I had inherited from my father. Alaska was unpredictable, uncertain, daunting and imposing. Surviving in the wilderness, living off-grid, was certainly not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. My father had to chop all his firewood, whereas back in England we got our chopped firewood delivered to our home, with all the arduous work taken out of the laborious chore. My brother was all for this easy, simple life, where everything was efficiently pre-prepared for you, and often conveniently came out of a plastic bag or a freezer cabinet, looking nothing like it did in its original natural state, rather like the ready-made soups you buy at the supermarket, the convenient meals, the chopped vegetables. Let's just say in the wilderness of Alaska, you made your own soups, sliced and peeled your own vegetables, even grew them, chopped your own firewood, and hunted for your own meat. It was a very different world, and it was a world that I rather liked. I loved the vast abundance, the magnanimous variety of the indigenous wildlife in Alaska that so often frequented the sprawling meadow on the right-hand side of my father's cabin. The cabin looked like a piece of alpine furniture, with its pleasingly simple wooden beams that blended so seamlessly into the environment, almost as if it had always belonged there, and I think the animals looked on the cabin as just another tree, an extension of the wild environment that they lived in. You would get grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, foxes, mooses, and all kinds of deer congregating around the cabin from time to time. My father always welcomed these visitations from the wildlife because he loved it so much. The distant horizon was confiscated by the resplendent silhouettes of the mountains, their billowing voluptuous forms snaking up into the sky like big fat ladies, basking lackadaisically under the sun, refusing to budge or even move a muscle, while their tips, rather like fingernails, were gracefully bespeckled with pretty light flakes of snow, like a glittering white nail varnish. Even my brother Luton, who was not by any manner of means an effusive character, and was by nature more reticent and reserved to express his feelings, did not hold back his enthusiasm and awe when he saw the beauty of Alaska, as he admitted that the beguiling landscape had quite literally stolen his breath away. "This place is dreamy," he said to me, "so dreamy. The kind of place poets write about, and artists come to paint. If a writer is suffering from writer's block, let me tell you, they need to come here for inspiration, as inspiration they will surely find. Alaska with its volcanoes, its tundra, its glaciers, its marvellous coastline, its highway passes, and alpine meadows, is really a paradise for so many." He was right, of course, about that. A day after we'd arrived in Alaska, my parents had locked themselves in their bedroom, giggling like a pair of lovesick teenagers. I could hear my mother squealing, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop tickling me! Stop it!" I knew my father was tickling her. He loved how she reacted when she was tickled. They were like a couple of frisky, frolicking wild animals in springtime, getting up to all kinds of shenanigans, and what they got up to, I didn't want to know, nor did I want my imagination to be entertained by such thoughts. One thing I did know was that my parents would be consumed and otherwise preoccupied with each other for a long time, like someone with indigestion, sitting on the bog for ages, with a red sign on the toilet cubicle saying, "Otherwise engaged." I was feeling frustrated, with ants in my pants, champing at the bit like a horse having been confined to his stable for far too long, that wants to break free, and so I was hankering after some form of entertainment. I didn't fancy hanging around, waiting forever for my parents to come out of their duo hibernation. Me and my brother decided to go exploring the woodgrove, well, after much persuasion on my part, which, let me tell you, had not come easily, I hasten to admit. My brother Luton was always for me a continuous work in progress. He never easily came around to my way of thinking about things. My father had warned us not to go out on our own, because it was so easy to get lost here in Alaska, but his wise, sagacious words fell on deaf ears. I was 12 years old at the time, and it had never even dawned on me, nor crossed my mind, that me and Luton could potentially get so terribly lost. The venturesome side of my unbridled character was burning to go exploring, and to hell with the consequences. I thoroughly enjoyed living on the edge, and inviting the spontaneity of daily life to surprise me. But little did I know that some surprises are not always welcome, and can have thorns on their blooms that can actually draw blood. I had not allowed myself to harbour any doubts or misgivings about such an impetuous choice. I knew my parents would not be best pleased with us, but did I care? Absolutely not. Having fun was a prerequisite for me. We hadn't come here to Alaska to wait on our parents. I could see that Luton was impregnated with a rigidly stiff reluctance that seemed to tether him to the cabin, like a devoted, well-behaved guard dog, diligently refusing to leave his owner's side. I could see his whole demeanour became very defensive when I gave him the nudge he clearly needed. But I knew that if I worked on him hard enough, he'd eventually come round to my way of thinking. It turns out I wasn't wrong. I'm not sure we should go exploring without Dad. I mean, it's very easy to get lost here, isn't it? Have you any idea how large it is out here in the wilderness? You heard what Dad said the other day. Lots of people go missing here every year, never to be seen and heard from again. Frankly, I'm not surprised by that. Looking for a missing person here could be like looking for a needle in a haystack. You're unlikely to ever find them. Why was my brother being so boringly sensible, so disinclined to take any risks, so prudently fixated about doing the right thing all the time? Even his school reports chorused his good behaviour. Luton is such a good boy, highly attentive in class, very popular among his peers, a well-rounded, productive young child who works so hard. Whereas my report cards were always complaining about my reluctance to socially engage with other pupils, my inability to get involved in class discussions. Colton is a very quiet, unassuming child, often daydreaming in class, failing to pay attention. He's a clever boy, but he needs to focus more on his studies. Why do you have to be so boring, Luton, I say? You're like an old stick in the mud. Boring, boring, boring. That's what you are. No, I'm not a stick in the mud. I'm not boring either. I'm just sensible, that's all. Yes, you are. You're a stick in the mud. You don't have a spirit of adventure, do you? You're like a boat tethered to the same mooring site, year after year, month after month, week after week, growing rust and mould and mildew. Because you just don't move a single inch. You refuse to budge. And you know what? You're missing out on so much. I mean, honestly, think about it, Luton. How lost are we going to get if we follow that stream through the woods and walk back the same way we came? It's not rocket science, is it? How do you suppose the ancients got around in the days of old without maps? They followed watercourses, didn't they? And they always found their way back home. I was expecting my brother to come up with 1,000 reasons why it wouldn't be sensibly judicious to go exploring without my father. But he was prudently reasoning exactly what I had to say, almost as if weighing up some mathematical equation in his head. And then quite suddenly he smiled at me in agreement, which was a pleasant surprise I wasn't expecting, but was hoping for. You know what, Colton? You're absolutely right. Mum and Dad are not going to be out of their room for a while, and we could be having fun out there. You're right. If we follow this stream, there's no way we can get lost. It's pretty straightforward, is it not? I couldn't believe that I had persuaded my brother to go exploring with me, but I was not going to allow him to change his mind. So before he could reflect any more on agreeing to come with me, he was running behind me, as I enthusiastically bolted towards the stream, eagerly leading the way. It would seem my brother had not appreciated being called a stick in the mud, or non-adventurous, even though it was true. Hold on, bro, wait for me, he cried, running behind me to catch his breath. If we're going to do this, bro, it would be quite nice to actually walk together, rather than you barging way ahead of me. You've never belonged to the Boy Scouts, have you? That's why you know nothing about teamwork. We need to stick together, do things together. It's not that. I was worried that you'd change your mind about coming. You always think too hard about everything. Fair enough, but we stick together from now on. Before long, me and my brother were having the time of our lives. Our previous reservations and doubts had abandoned our thoughts, as we became blissfully lost in the moment. The warm sunshine beat down magnanimously upon our shoulders. We ran through the knee-high grass of the alpine fields, bursting with colourful blooms of wild flowers that dappled the scenery in a fragrant ethereal confetti of pretty colours. We assiduously ambled and navigated our way through this sumptuous shaded sanctuary, where a soft sunlight twinkled through the canopy, casting a peppering of shadows on the fauna and flora. Lacy ferns elegantly graced the earthen floor, with outstretched arms of viridescent splendour. We loved the feel of the leaf litter, fallen branches, old leaves, and needled boughs that crackled, snapped, and popped, and crunched beneath the rubber soles of our boots. The smell of the citrusy pine-like terpenes of the trees enveloped our nostrils in its pleasing citrusy bouquet. Our faces were being gently kissed by a cool breeze, which even caused the velvety needled boughs of the trees to jiggle, as they were nudged by her tenacious, rather audacious caresses. We could hear the pretty orchestral trills and warbles of the birds' song, and were afforded sweet glimpses of the cobalt sky above our heads, where we observed calling birds majestically surfing the wind with outstretched wings. This whole time me and my brother diligently followed the course of the stream, watching the rambunctious water blasting angrily over the rocks, thrashing itself so hard against their jagged, unyielding contours, spawning a plethora of white foam to congregate above its surfaces like a bubble bath, while the water bounded ever forwards on its downward trajectory. It possessed a magnificent bluish hue, and we could see some large cold water fish swimming beneath its depths, and on several occasions we tried our hand at trying to catch one of these fish, but alas, they were far too fast and slippery, so they easily escaped our eager grasps. "That's what a fishing rod is for," my brother teased. "If it was so easy to catch a fish by hands, rods and bait would never have been invented, silly." "But it's fun, giving it a go," I insisted. "I bet someone in the world has managed to catch a fish by hand before." My brother chuckles. "Those people are few and far between, Colton." At one point during our adventure, we sat by the edge of the stream and threw rocks into the water, competing against each other to see who could throw their rock the furthest. "I'm better than you," I pointed out proudly, not reluctant to boast about my prowess. "My stones reach beyond that reddish stone over there, but your stones failed to even get that far." "I can do it," my brother insisted. "Just you wait and see." My brother's competitive spirit came racing to the surface, and try as he might, he could not get his stones as far across the water as I did, which caused him no end of frustration, and secretly rather pleased me. For a long while he was so caught up in his determined attempts to break my record that he had not sensed the bodeful impression that I was beginning to perceive. Something was out there watching us, but then the haunting, airy feeling suddenly just drifted away and disappeared like a seed on the wind. So I firmly told myself I had imagined it all along, and it was nothing. I think me and my brother were so caught up in enjoying ourselves, we had forgotten how much time had actually elapsed. When you're having a good time, it's funny how it slips away through your fingers like butter. But when you're doing something dreadfully dull, time obstinately stands still, as every excruciating slow minute lingers for longer. Me and Luton ambled on our merry way, without a single care in the world. The stream forked and divided into two tributaries in a downward trajectory, both remarkably similar. For some reason my brother and I became confused. We couldn't remember which stream led back to the cabin, and which one didn't. We became alarmed. My brother's enthusiasm dissipated, like the steam rising from a kettle. He began to huff with indignation, like an angry dragon. Even his nostrils seemed to flare. He straightened out his body. His chest rose, and he became rigidly stiff like one of the trees in the woodgrove, which always happened when he was uptight and anxious. When my brother fretted like this, his demeanour would change. When he became like this, even my parents gave him a wide berth. I knew my brother's mannerisms very well. He was stewing in his frustration. Very soon he would begin to bark, and then it came blasting out like the unwelcome air from a hot oven. "Did I not tell you this would happen, Colton? But you wouldn't listen, would you? You always think you know better. But when have you ever been right about anything? You never think about anything. You rush towards things with all guns blazing, never once considering the consequences of your actions. I don't know how the heck you managed to persuade me to come with you like this. I told you it's easy to get lost here in Alaska. But would you listen? No, you wouldn't. You never listen. Now I'm not sure which stream we should take. Everywhere looks exactly the same. I do believe we're lost. No thanks to you. We can't afford to take the wrong stream, can we? Because we could end up miles away from the cabin. What the heck are we supposed to do now? He says, giving me a look that tells me I'm wholly responsible for getting us tangled up in this knotty mess, and that I should somehow find a way of undoing the damage. Why do you have to be so impetuously impulsive? Why did I allow you to talk me into this? He groans, tugging his dark hair with one of his hands and sighing in exasperation. When my brother rants, he can go on, and it can become quite annoying. I was beginning to feel quite defensive. Surely it wasn't as bad as all that, I thought. Maybe we should just take a guess as to which stream is the correct one, and take our chances. But I don't dare voice the suggestion to my brother. It'll only add fuel to his fire, and give him greater reason to become more indignant. All of a sudden, me and my brother hear something moving towards us. Heavy, ponderous feet appear to be thumping the ground. It sounds like the feet belong to something substantial in size. But that's when we see him. A man is walking towards us, with what looks like a fishing rod in his hand, and a big smile on his face. The man is wearing long khaki shorts, long socks and boots, and a cotton top. He looks to be in his early 60s, with a white full beard and a white moustache. But his greenish-brown eyes look a little strange. He walks towards us. I'm not exactly sure how to react to this stranger, who emerges from nowhere, just when we need help.
Hello there. I think I know that look on your faces rather too well. My guess is you young boys are lost. Am I right or am I right?
I sigh with relief. As it happens, sir, you're absolutely right. You see, we were following the stream from our cabin, but the stream broke off into 2 tributaries. Now we can't remember which stream is which, and which one leads back to our cabin, and which one doesn't. We're completely disorientated, rather confused. The cabin's called White Whisper. It belongs to my father. You don't happen to know it, do you, sir?
Oh, I know the cabin very well, young man. I can take you there myself. No problem at all, he says, giving us a wide, encouraging smile. My brother and I look at each other with relief, but my brother's relief seems short-lived. I need to relieve myself, says my brother. Give us a minute, sir. I'm all right. I don't need to go. I'll wait here for you, bro, but don't be long. My brother gives me a condemning look that I don't dare challenge, which says in no uncertain terms, in an unwritten Morse code, that I know only too well to do what he says and not to argue. Come to think of it, I do need to go, and relieve myself too, sir, I hurriedly interject. I won't be a minute, I say, following my brother through the trees. Well, I'll wait here for you, says the man. Don't be long.
I follow my brother towards the trees, wondering why he had given me that funny, rather peculiar look. The stranger seemed nice enough. What's my brother worrying about? I mean, it would be good to find our way safely back home, would it not? So what's the big deal? It seems we're lucky to have found such a fortunate help to cross our path so fortuitously. When me and my brother are safely behind a large tree, my brother whispers to me, "There's something not right about that man. Don't you think it's strange he suddenly turns up out of the blue like this when we're lost? Who is he anyway? I mean, there shouldn't be a soul out here for miles, and furthermore, he claims to know Dad's cabin. I mean, how many people would know Dad's cabin? Dad's cabin is out in the sticks, and he claims to know it. That's not right. Something's not right about him. He makes my hackles rise. He immediately gave me the creeps the moment I saw him." "But what do you mean?" I asked gingerly. "It's those eyes of his. Didn't you notice them? They're weird, far too big for his face, and they don't look human. They look hungry. They look guileful and malicious." "What are you saying? Are you crazy? How can he not be human? He looks human to me. A person cannot pretend to be something they're not. He seems nice enough. Maybe a bit eccentric, but that's what you'd expect out here in Alaska, wouldn't you?" "Look," says my brother suddenly. "Look!" I don't bloody believe this. My brother is pointing through the trees towards the man we had encountered only moments before. Me and my brother are looking at the man. We cannot believe what we're seeing.
The man is looking around, possibly to check that no one is watching him. And then suddenly, as if by magic, he morphs into this massive creature. The only way I can describe the creature to you is that it seemed like he had the head of an otter and the body of a human being, along with the tail of an otter covered with short, sleek, waterproof brown hair, like you would see in an otter, but standing up on his 2 feet. He was easily over 9 foot tall and 800 pounds. I realised he had shapeshifted into a man, as some kind of a ruse to catch us off guard. Was he intending to eat us, I wondered? And he was pretending to be a man as a clever, masterful, duplicitous ploy of his. What the hell is he? I'd never known anything could shapeshift like this before. It was like when we went to relieve ourselves, he had used the opportunity to let go of his human-like appearance and become himself for a moment. Perhaps shapeshifting could be uncomfortable, like a tight-fitting sock. While we weren't looking at him, he could stretch himself out for a moment. This otter-like thing is calling out to us. Are you ready, boys? We watch him quickly morph into a man again, as he's looking towards the trees and comes ambling towards us. The sound of his heavy feet do not match the footsteps of a 200-pound man. They betray his real size and sound like something significantly weightier. My brother and I look at each other incredulously. Oh my God, says my brother. He's very dangerous. We've got to get out of here. Whatever he wants with us, it's not good. We can hear the man walking through the trees towards us. We both surreptitiously hide, finding a large tree trunk to accommodate our immediate needs. Boys, where are you? The man calls after us. I can't wait here all day. I've got things to do. If you want me to show your way back to the cabin, you better come now with me. I notice the once saccharine, sweet, friendly voice is beginning to sound almost annoyed. Me and my brother stay hidden behind the tree trunk, breathing heavily. My brother puts his finger on his lips, indicating for me to remain quiet. I don't ever recall a time when my whole body was overcome with an overwhelming sense of dread, as I had this impending feeling that we were not going to get out of this forest alive. This shape-shifting creature had a nefarious agenda towards us, and whatever he was, I couldn't entertain such thoughts right now, as I was a gibbering wreck. Me and my brother are so terrified, we're clinging to each other tightly, trembling like a couple of wobbling jellies. My hands are sweating profusely, while beads of perspiration pour down my back, like streaming raindrops running down a glass pane. My heart is thumping so loudly, it's almost screaming through my chest. Indeed, it is so intrusively loud, I'm terrified the man will actually hear it. He's walking up and down the forest through the trees, scanning the area as he looks for us. I can hear the leaf litter and the twigs pop, crack and snap under his feet. I notice his movements do not sound like a man. They sound like a burly creature, but a creature with a graceful agility. The clawing silence has subdued the birdsong and punctured the wind so fiercely that it too has resisted blowing. In a trice the silence is hijacked by the familiar reassuring voices of my parents calling out our names. Colton! Colton! Luton! Luton! Where are you? Where are you? I've never heard such a sweet sound in all my life, as my heart was filled with a monumental relief that washed over me like a cooling wave. So like a couple of jackrabbits bounding out of our burrows, we courageously ran through the trees towards my parents, looking back over our shoulders to see if we can see the outlandish man, but he has conveniently vanished. I have never been so thankful in all my life to embrace my wonderful parents again, but all the while I could feel a pair of evil eyes burning through our backs. Me and my brother hug my parents impulsively, as if we haven't seen them in a decade. My, you're both very pleased to see us, says my father. Why the hell did you go wandering off? He asks, looking very sombre. I told you it wasn't a good idea. You don't know this environment around here. It can get quite dicey and treacherous. You could end up getting horribly lost. How many times have I warned you about this? What is it about you kids? You never listen, he says, his eyes fixing sternly on me. Daddy, we saw something really bizarre, says Luton. This thing shape-shifted in front of us, from a human being into an otter man. He stood up between 9 and 8 foot tall. I can't be sure how tall he was, but he was very big. He approached us as a human, but we physically saw him shape-shift. when he didn't know we were actually looking at him. I noticed there was something off about his eyes, Dad. They were too large for his face, a greenish-brown colour. It didn't look human. So we pretended we needed to go to the toilet. We hid behind a large tree. We were so frightened that he was going to find us, Daddy. There was something so capriciously shifty about him. You see, Dad, he was offering to take us to your cabin. He was acting as if he was familiar with your place. But I knew there was something wrong about him from the very beginning, didn't I, Colton? I nodded. Daddy, Luton knew he wasn't human. But he seemed convincing enough to me. But then he shape-shifted into this ugly otter, with a small head, very large shoulders and a long tail like an otter's. He looked like a human otter, as weird and nonsensical as that may sound, but I promise you, Dad, I say obsequiously, I'm not making any of this up. My father looks grave. I think you saw the Kushtaka, son. I'm very glad the two of you were so astute. It is claimed to use trickery and shape-shifting tactics to lure unsuspecting human beings away that are lost, especially young people like yourself. Some suspect that many missing persons cases here in Alaska are connected to the Kushtaka, and I would not be surprised if that were the case. Thank God the two of you are safe with us right now, but never wander off on your own again. It's not safe, nor is it wise. Oh, my God, says my mother, looking alarmed. Why don't the two of you ever listen to your father? I don't know how many times he's told you not to go off on your own. God knows what could have happened to you if we hadn't come along in time. Likely me and your father have scared it off, as there is safety in numbers. Where did you say it was? In those trees over there, I say, pointing towards the woods. Oh, dear, says my mother. Look, I'm shaking like a leaf. If you kids aren't more careful, you'll give me a heart attack. I told Colton we shouldn't go wandering off, says Luton, determined to offload the guilt on my shoulders. He persuaded me it would be a good idea. Don't blame your brother, Luton, says my mother. Your brother is much more impulsive than you. But you could have put your foot down, couldn't you, Luton? But you didn't. In my book, that makes you more responsible. You know what your brother's like. You're the older brother. You should know better. I'm very disappointed in the both of you. Moments later, we heard this loud, discomposing roar coming from the woodgrove, and my mother started to panic, while our father told us to keep calm and to walk back as fast as we could, but not to run under any circumstances. I've never been more comforted and appeased to get to the cabin when we burst through the door, and my father locked it behind us. His face was almost ashen. I realized that he too had been shaken up, and to my amazement, he was actually trembling. I watched him grab a bottle of whiskey and drink back a couple of gulps to steady his nerves. What the hell was that scream? My brother asks him. I've never heard anything like it before. It made my blood run cold. It went right through me. Do you think it was the creature the kids saw? This Kishtaka, or whatever you were saying it is? Kushtaka, corrected my father. It was the Kushtaka, all right. I do not think it could have been anything else. How do you know? You can't be familiar with the sounds it makes, surely. Because I saw it when we were leaving. You're kidding, says my mother, her face now losing colour. You actually saw it. What did it look like? As the children described, a huge, grotesque, ugly otter man. But why didn't we see it? I don't know, said my father, but I got the impression this thing wanted me to see him. It was like he was saying to me, your kids got away this time, but not next time, to be sure. You hear that, kids? Says my mother. I never want you under any circumstances to go exploring on your own. Do you understand me? Not with that thing out there. We don't know what it's capable of. And with this ability to shapeshift, he could pretend to be anyone. It's a horrifying thought. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, after my mother had cooked an amazing chicken casserole with rice, we started to talk about what had happened to us that day, and my father told us about a strange encounter he had in Alaska when he was a young boy. And this was his story. My father's account. Since as long as I can remember, I've known about strange phenomenon in Alaska, but growing up in the Alaskan wilderness, where me and my brother lived in a cabin with my father, I knew of the existence of strange idiosyncratic creatures, like the Kushtaka and Bigfoot, but I never imagined I'd have an encounter of my own. All over Alaska, people have stories. Some people talk. Others keep their lips tightly locked, as if they're holding on to a secret that they're not willing to share. Maybe they're terribly afraid their story will be too incredulous, too far-fetched, so out there that no one would believe a word of it. But here in Alaska, even the craziest, most outlandish stories are credible. You see, out here we're used to the bizarre, and quite frankly, nothing ever surprises us. My mother was one person that went missing in Alaska, never ever to be seen again, which was why me and my brother Simeon were being raised by my dad in a remote cabin without a mother. I hasten to say I barely remember her, as she disappeared from our lives when I was about 9 and my brother 13. My father told me that my mother had told her she was going to spend the weekend camping with 4 of her girlfriends from Fairbanks, as one of her girlfriends, Hilda, was celebrating her 40th birthday. Hilda was passionate about the great outdoors, and so she wanted to have her birthday bash in nature. My father encouraged my mother to go off and have a good time, but he said that he had this horrible feeling deep down in his gut that something was going to go badly wrong. But he told himself he was being ridiculous. He knew he was very protective of his wife, and so the idea of her camping with a few of her girlfriends wasn't a comfortable feeling for him. He had even offered to go along in a separate tent so he could watch over them, but my mother squirmed at the very idea, claiming they were capable of looking after themselves, thank you very much, and they didn't need a man cramping their style by babysitting them. The 5 girls had thoroughly enjoyed a fabulous day together, hiking and exploring the countryside, after which they prepared a barbecue and cooked their meat over the grill. They were sharing a tent together, but during the night they woke to hear some thumping sounds on their tent, followed by heavy breathing. They could hear ponderous vibrating footsteps walking around the tent, and see the tent being pushed in by what looked like heavy hands of some kind. All 5 girls sat up trembling in their sleeping bags, their faces drained of all colour, their eyes as wide as saucers, their hearts pounding violently in their ears, wondering what the hell could be out there. But most of them weren't brave enough to look through the tent opening, although one of the women was plucky enough to do so, and she managed to fire some gunshots in the night through a small opening in the tent. After that, everything went still, and the woman calmed down, realizing that whatever it was had finally left. They decided it might have been a grizzly bear, but they couldn't be sure. The following morning the girls woke up to find my mother had vanished off the face of the earth, but when they examined the outside of the tent, they found these heavy foot impressions like that of a wolf. But this was not an ordinary wolf. The impressions were considerably deep, suggesting that whatever had been walking around the tent weighed a few 100 pounds. The girls frantically ran out of the tent to look for my mother. They found her pyjamas torn to shreds on some bramble bushes. The girls were confounded and petrified, and a search party was organised, while helicopters flew over the area searching for my mother, but she was never found. Everybody believed she'd been snatched away by a wild animal, but my father perceived my mother had been attacked by a dogman of some kind, as the huge indentations in the ground that baffled everyone told him that this was not just a large wild animal, but something far more iniquitously sinister. And on a previous hike to the very same location, a couple reported encountering a hideous wolf-like man that had harassed them in their truck. They had been so terrified, describing the creature as like a demon from the very pits of hell itself. My father believed that that is what my mother had encountered. He thought maybe she had left the tent to go and relieve herself, but the strange thing is that none of the girls in the tent heard her screaming, or someone would have come to her defence. My mother was never ever found. She became another one of Alaska's bizarre missing persons cases, of which there are so many. People go missing here every year, and there's so many fertile stories that abound as to who or what could be responsible for their mysterious vanishing. One day when I was about 14 years old, me and my brother were flying our kite in the wind. It had been given to me as a birthday present. It was quite blustery, and the kite ended up getting caught up on top of the tree, tangled up in its branches. There was no way we were going to get it down. The tree was a tall spruce tree with needled boughs, so you couldn't exactly climb a tree like that. Me and my brother were so bitterly disappointed, as it was beyond our reach. So I began to look for a long stick or something to be able to reach up to grab the kite. We even tried throwing stones at it to try and get it to move, but it remained resolutely stuck. And that was when we saw her. My brother and I were so shocked. Of course, we knew what she was. We'd heard enough stories in Alaska about Bigfoot to be in no uncertain doubt that this is what she was. But nothing prepares you for a one-on-one encounter with the creature. She ran towards the trees. She was so tall, I think easily 9 foot. She reached up into the tree and detangled my kite for me, and returned it to me. But before she gives it back to me, she strokes the shining red material, and looks at us with twinkling eyes. She indicated for me to start flying my kite, and I did. She stayed with us for a long while, as we flew our kite, and she even had a turn. She was so much better at flying a kite than we were. She made us look like novices. I remember she was oohing and aahing and clapping her hands in delight. She was so enthusiastic. In the end, I actually gave her my kite, because I knew I could get another one very easily. She was fascinated by it, and graciously thankful. She patted us both on the back and said some words to us in a strange language. I knew she was thanking us. I remember never comprehending a Bigfoot could be this human. She was like a giant human being, weighing about 800 pounds and very stockily built, with long flowing coal-black hair and a human face. The following morning there was a pile of river stones on our front porch. We knew they were from her. "Wow, that's incredible," I say to my dad. "I think when I go to Fairbanks I'm going to buy a kite so I can also encounter a Bigfoot." But I regret to say, despite my best efforts, I've never had an encounter, but I'm still hoping. These days I live in Alaska, close to my father, in a cabin of my own. I'm married with 2 children, as like my dad, I like to live on the edge. But my sensible brother Luton lives in a cosy English village in Berkshire, with his feet firmly settled down on terra firma. Some things never change, do they? So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.